Wally turned and looked at her. She was standing on the porch in that pretty dress, her hair curled around her face. The setting sun was glowing gold, and the color of her skin and hair were brightened, heightened. He could hardly bear the pain that hit him. He looked at her for only a few seconds, and then he said, "I love you, Lorraine. I always will." He turned quickly, but she said, "Wally," and he stopped. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I love you too, but it never would have worked." Tears were glistening in her eyes. She hurried inside. Wally watched as she disappeared, her blue dress hazy through the screen. As he turned away, the image was still there in his head, her standing on the porch, illuminated by the sunset, whispering, "I love you too." He had the feeling that that picture would hurt him just as much in 20 or 50 years as it did right now. Wally drove home, and all the way he steeled himself to deal with the onslaught from his family. But it didn't come. No one tried to change his mind, not even Mom. He went to bed early, slept fitfully, and the next day he drove downtown, where he signed the papers. The weeks that followed were hollow for Wally, and they passed slowly. On Wally's last night at home, Mom cooked a farewell dinner. The next morning he would report to Fort Douglas near the U, where he would take his final physical examination and process his paperwork. Mom prepared a big meal, like a Sunday dinner, of roast beef and mashed potatoes, corn on the cob, and a cold watermelon for dessert. Everyone laughed and joked, and Wally put on one of his shows, teasing LaRue and Beverly and making claims about visiting exotic islands with pretty dancing girls. Dad was quiet all this time, but finally, after dessert, he said, "Wally, have you thought about receiving a father's blessing before you go?" "I hadn't thought about it, but sure, that'd be good." So everyone walked into the living room, and Wally sat on the piano bench, which Alex set in the middle of the room. Dad took a moment before he placed his hands on Wally's head. They were big, heavy hands, and Wally liked the feel of them. He shut his eyes and listened to Dad's voice fill the room. "Walter Daniel Thomas," he pronounced, "with the power of the holy Melchizedek priesthood, and in the name of Jesus Christ, I lay my hands upon your head to give you a father's blessing." The words came easily after that, the phrases familiar to Wally, but gradually he heard his father's voice begin to strain. "I bless you with the Lord's protection, to keep you safe in war or peace, to grant you strength and resistance to disease. I promise you that if you will turn to the Lord, He will deepen your faith. Take with you the love of this family, Walter. Hold it in your heart." Dad stopped then and took some time, maybe to get his emotions under control. "Walter, know this is your home, and always will be. You are part of all of us, sealed up unto eternity. I bless you, son, that you will come home to us safe and well, and full of the Spirit of the Lord." When he was finished, he lifted his hands slowly, and the room was silent. When Wally stood up and turned around, he saw tears on his dad's face. Wally nodded, unable to say anything. But then everyone came to him, and one after the other they took him in their arms. Jean did it quickly and then hurried away. LaRue and Beverly clung to him, both crying and squeezing him around the middle. Bobby sobbed, wetting his hair. Alex gave Wally a quick hug and some pats on the back, and then Mom held on to Wally and whispered a blessing of her own. Wally saw that Dad was unsure what to do, so he stepped toward him, but in the same instant he lost his nerve and merely reached his hand out. "Thanks," he said. Their eyes met only briefly, but an understanding seemed to pass between them. Wally was too moved to say anything, and so he merely mumbled that he needed to pack, and he went upstairs. But for a long time he merely sat on his bed. He could no longer remember why he had wanted so badly to leave. After a while, Bobby came up and sat down next to him. "Are you okay, Wally?" she asked. "Sure. Are you wishing you could change your mind?" "I don't know. I'll be all right once I get going." "Well, I'm wishing I could change mine." Wally turned to look at her. "What do you mean?" "I gave in. I told David I couldn't marry him." "Why?" "It was just too difficult to make work. But now I miss him so much I can hardly stand it." Wally wanted to tell her about Lorraine, about all he was feeling, but he couldn't do it. "Are you sure you're okay?" Bobby asked again. "I'm fine," Wally said. "Don't worry about me." Chapter 25. Brother Stoltz was walking again. His knee gave him pain, and it probably always would, but it had healed better than his shoulder. His arm was still held with a sling. He could move his elbow and managed to use his hand, but even that caused him pain. He had returned to his teaching and went about the work patiently, but every day was exhausting, and every night was made tedious by his inability to sleep. Anna was working now. She had a gymnasium education, and she had always planned to attend a university, but everything had changed in Germany. She worked by assignment as a secretary for a company that made military uniforms. She typed letters and kept books, and she did the bidding of a sour old manager who leered at her when she walked across the room. Christmas was happy, however, no matter how difficult everything was. 2 days before Christmas, Brother Stoltz had sent Peter on his bicycle into the country, and Peter had been able to buy some fresh produce. The Stoltzes sent Peter with a few of the carrots and apples to the other families in the branch. And then, on Christmas Eve, Brother Stoltz said, "Come with me, Peter." With the help of a cane and Peter on one side of him, he had left the house. Anna had assumed that he was going to buy some little gift for the family, and had not made a fuss, even though she knew how hard it was for him to walk very far. But when he had returned 2 hours later, both Anna and her mother were greatly concerned. Father looked exhausted as he dropped onto a kitchen chair, but he was smiling. "I did something the Führer would not like, and I feel better than I have in a long time." "Oh, Heinrich, what have you done?" "Peter and I went to visit Bruder Goldfarb. It was time someone from the branch paid him a visit. We gave him 4 carrots and 2 nice apples. He cried and kissed both of us. It was wonderful. He's a man I would like to know better." Anna was proud of her father. She could see, however, that Sister Stoltz was afraid. "Please, never again," she said. But Brother Stoltz didn't promise, and his spirits were clearly raised. There was no Christmas tree this year, no candles, and Christmas dinner was simple, but the Stoltzes sang together, and they read the story of Christ's birth. Anna kept thinking of the Christmas 2 years before, when Elder Thomas and Elder Meekum had been with them, and Anna had been so young and yet so flirtatious with poor Alex. She understood how wrong she had been, but she also remembered the way he had looked at her. It was one of her favorite memories. "I wonder what Elder Thomas is doing today," Peter said. "I wish he could visit us." Brother Stoltz nodded, and Sister Stoltz said yes, that would be nice. She glanced at her daughter, gave her a tiny nod. Alex looked through the shirts and ties and stockings that Mom and Dad had gotten him, and then he watched the girls play with their new dolls. He wondered about Anna's Christmas. He watched the papers every day to see whether bombs had dropped on Frankfurt, and so far he hadn't read of any. But Berlin was being hit hard, and with the terrible German blitz on London, the British would surely retaliate against more German cities. "Have you heard anything from Wally lately?" Alex asked, just to get his mind on something else. "We finally got a letter a couple of days ago," Sister Thomas said, after about a month of not hearing anything. "He said he sent a package, and he was sorry he sent it so late. You know Wally." "How is he doing?" "All right, I think. His letter was awfully short and full of jokes, but I got the feeling he was homesick. He said he wished he could be home for Christmas." "I hope he is homesick," Alex said. "On my first Christmas away, I think I finally realized how much my home meant to me." "Sing that German Christmas song for us," LaRue said. "Stille Nacht?" "No, the other one, the happy one." "O du Fröhliche?" "Yeah, I think so." "Not right now." Alex didn't want to sing. He looked over at Bobby, who smiled and gave him a little nod, as if to say, "I think I know what you're feeling." The family had been together the night before, and Alex and Bobby had found a few minutes alone in the kitchen to talk. Alex had asked her whether she was still in touch with David. "We still write," she had said. "He's been my friend these last 2 years. I can't seem to give that up, even if it hurts. I'm going to end my pain this year, or at least ease it." "How?" "If I have to commandeer a British bomber and land in Frankfurt somehow, I'm going to talk to Anna." "And what will you say to her?" "I'm going to ask her to marry me, and promise to wait for her no matter how long this stupid war lasts." Wally was sitting in a bar in Manila. He didn't drink beer very often, and he actually didn't like it, but he drank 1 or maybe 2 now and then. The excuse he used was that sometimes it was the only cold drink he could get. Earlier, the 20th Pursuit Squadron, the fighter unit Wally was with, had eaten a huge Christmas feast, and now in the late afternoon, as the heat was subsiding a little, Wally and a few friends had taken a taxi into the city and were relaxing a little. It was an odd Christmas, entirely different from his experiences at home, and he was feeling rather strange. "Let's have another beer," one of the men said. "Forget the beer," a man named Barney, one of the older guys in the unit, bellowed. "I say we take these boys to the Golden Gate Bar. It's time they became men." There were 5 airmen at the big table besides Wally's 2 new friends, Warren and Jack. Warren Hicks was LDS and from Idaho, although he hadn't grown up in a family that was all that active. Jack Norland was a Westerner from a small Montana town who had gravitated rather naturally to Warren and Wally. Wally knew for sure that he wasn't going to get involved with a prostitute, but he was curious to see what went on at a place like that. He looked at Warren, who was shaking his head. "I don't want to go over there," he told Wally. But not 5 minutes later, the 8 men had piled into 2 taxis, and they were motoring down the street toward the Golden Gate Bar. The place turned out to be dumpy and cheap, much like the bar they had just left. But when another round of drinks was ordered, a waitress arrived with each drink, one for each of the soldiers. A little woman, really just a girl, chose Wally. She was vaguely pretty, in spite of the heaviness of her makeup and a certain exaggeration in her attempt to be seductive. She placed a beer in front of Wally, put her arm around his shoulders, and held her face so close that she was almost touching his cheek, and she whispered, "What can I do for you?" "Nothing," Wally was quick to say, and a bit too loudly. Most of the men laughed. Wally watched Barney cup his hand around a woman's backside and pull her against him. Like the others, she didn't have much on, a low-cut blouse and a short skirt that was split along the side. Barney was a heavy man who wore his shirt unbuttoned halfway down whenever he was out of uniform. He never said a sentence without some vulgarity in it. "Let's get out of here," Warren said again. Wally nodded. The other men were beginning to paw their own waitresses, and the young woman who was still behind Wally reached around him and began to rub his chest. Suddenly a sense of shame struck Wally. He pushed his chair back, stood up, and looked at Warren. "It's Christmas," he said. "I know, this makes me sick." He got up, too. "We'll see you guys later," Wally said. "Are you coming, Jack?" Jack seemed to waver, but Barney shouted, "Stick around! I think that girl has a Christmas present for you." Jack shrugged and said, "I guess I'll stay." Wally and Warren got out. They found a taxi and they headed back to the base. They said very little along the way, but when Warren said, "I wish I could be home today," a surge of homesickness hit Wally that was more powerful than anything he had felt since the day he left Salt Lake. Wally calculated the hours and tried to think what time it was at home. But Christmas had not come yet. The Philippines were across the international date line, a day ahead of Utah. Wally felt the loss of Christmas Eve and Christmas morning still to come, and suddenly he wanted to be home. When he got back to the barracks, very few of the men were there. He was glad for the quiet and the relative privacy. He got inside the mosquito netting and he lay on his bed. He tried to picture it all, LaRue and Beverly running downstairs, Jean ambling down behind them trying not to act too excited, everyone there together. And then he thought of his dad reading the Christmas story. Wally considered looking for his Bible, of reading the passages in Luke himself, but he couldn't do it, for all kinds of reasons. And so he lay there in the heat, and he tried not to think of home anymore. The trouble was, his thoughts wandered where they wanted to go, along 13th East, and there, on the porch, he saw that lovely figure in the sunset wearing a light blue polka-dot dress. He suddenly threw back the mosquito netting and stood up. He had to think of something to do. Chapter 26. It was a cold February day, and snow had been falling all night. Alex had been in his office since very early that morning. He was trying to keep up with all the government paperwork. Recently, he had hired a second shift to keep up with the contracts that were coming in, but that had only meant more supervision and more paperwork. Alex was ordering new machinery all the time, and his operators were sometimes novices who had to be supervised. Some of the parts had minute tolerances, and a small mistake could cause an entire order to be rejected. Alex was actually quite mechanical, and he learned quickly. His foremen were, for the most part, much older than he was, but they respected his ability to troubleshoot and to work patiently with new hires. Alex sometimes escaped the plant to eat lunch at a nearby diner where he could be left alone for a few minutes. Today, as was often the case, he hadn't gotten around to eating, but President Thomas stepped up to Alex's little office and stood in the open doorway. "Dinner time," he said. Alex looked up, surprised. Dad came by often, but he had never brought food before. "Oh, thanks," Alex said. "Come in. Push a few of those papers aside and I'll join you. Your mom cooked enough for the whole plant, I think. I'd like to push all these forms into the waste paper basket." Alex, you need more secretarial help, or an assistant manager. You can't keep pushing yourself like this. I know. I plan to hire some more people as soon as I get time. Dad pulled a plate from the basket and handed it to Alex. He pulled out utensils and cloth napkins and a bowl of potato salad. There's a nice breast piece right there, he said. Alex did take the chicken breast, and he could hardly believe how good it tasted. Alex, I couldn't be any more proud of you, Dad said. I didn't expect you at your age to step forward and make such a go of this thing. Dad bit into a thigh piece and stayed after it until he had finished it. So how do you feel about being a manager now? I'll bet it's more interesting than you expected. Dad, Alex said, I'm doing the best I can, but I can't really say I enjoy it. I don't understand that, Alex. Just think of the doors that are opening up for you. It just doesn't engage my mind. I like ideas. Are you saying you still want to be a history professor? Yes, I do. Alex, you're helping your country here, and you're getting set up financially so you'll never have to worry again. Look, I told you from the beginning, I'll manage the plant long enough to get it going. Then I'm going back to school. Alex, if I were you, I wouldn't be so quick to turn away from the great blessing you're receiving. You could have your fortune made in a few years. For a time, Alex and President Thomas merely sat and ate, but Alex felt the tension. Dad was obviously frustrated. Alex, he finally said, your mom tells me that you're still attached to this German girl, the one you baptized. This sounded a little too much like an accusation. Son, you can't let this thing confuse your thinking. Hitler needs to be stopped, whether this girl lives in Germany or not, and you absolutely can't think about waiting to marry her. Alex wiped his mouth and then dropped his napkin on his desk. Dad, come on, that's my decision, not yours. I'm just being realistic. You need to get married, and you may not see this girl. Her name is Anna. All right, Anna. But you may not see her for years, if ever. But it's still my decision. So what are you telling me? Are you going to try to wait out the whole war? I know she's a pretty girl, but wait, Dad, give me some credit. Well, I don't know what's on your mind. You don't tell me anything. Alex leaned forward and put his elbows on his desk. Before I left on my mission, I told you my testimony wasn't strong enough. And you said, that's what a mission is for. You'll learn to get answers. And that's what happened. I learned to get answers. And I got my answer about Anna. Alex, the only way this war is going to be short is if Hitler defeats England this summer. Otherwise, it's going to last for years. Are you absolutely sure you want to wait? Yes. Dad sat for a time, his eyes distant and full of concern, but finally he said, Son, I would never tell you not to follow the Spirit, but I hope you haven't deceived yourself into believing what you want to believe. If that's what I've done, then I don't know the Spirit and I don't really have a testimony. It's that simple to me. You'll love Anna someday. You'll thank the Lord for her. I hope so, Alex. Dad got up. He stuck his plate in the basket. Does she know how you feel? He asked. Will she wait for you? I've written her, but I don't know whether my letters have gotten through. Can you think of any way I could contact her, like through the church? Dad left the chicken and potato salad on Alex's desk, but he put the plates and utensils and napkins in the basket. He seemed to be thinking. I could talk to J. Reuben Clark, he finally said. He was with the State Department for a long time, and he served as an ambassador. He has contacts all over. He made some kind of official visit to Berlin during that first year I was on my mission. Dad nodded. Yes, I'm sure he's been there many times, and I know he keeps in touch with the American ambassador to Germany. Maybe there's a way to get a letter to the ambassador and from there to church leaders. Dad, that would be great. All right, I'll call him. I'll see what he says. Or maybe I can make an appointment for you. I'm sure you can make a better case than I could. Do you still think I'm making a mistake? Dad had taken a step toward the door, but he turned back now and he looked at Alex. Son, this breaks my heart. I hate to see you put off marriage that long, and I worry whether it will all work out. If you had told me she was a swell girl and you couldn't live without her, I would tell you to stop kidding yourself. But you're telling me God is guiding you in this, and I'm not going to take that lightly. Thanks, Dad, Alex smiled. I'll tell you something else. She's the prettiest girl who ever lived. Well, sorry, son. I married the prettiest girl who ever lived. A long time ago. Dad smiled, but only with some effort. As he turned to leave, Alex saw in his eyes, in his posture, how deeply disappointed he was. A week later, Alex met with President J. Reuben Clark, who told him flatly that there was not one thing he could do. But like President Thomas, he was moved by Alex's commitment, and he finally promised to get a letter to her through church channels if he possibly could. Before Alex left, President Clark looked Alex in the eye and said, "What I fear is that you and so many of our young men will soon be involved in this war. The bad thing about war is not just that people get killed, it's that it creates killers." Alex nodded. "We can't forget our purpose, Brother Thomas. This war is splitting our church up, separating us from our own brothers and sisters, stopping our missionary work. It breaks my heart. I look at a young man like you, and I see Satan trying to enlist you in his service, wreaking havoc, spilling blood, when you need to be building the kingdom, raising up a family unto the Lord." President Clark's volume and power had gradually risen. "I don't like spending my time building weapons," Alex said. "No one seems to understand that." President Clark nodded, but then he smiled. "Well, sometimes I get up on my high horse and I have to be careful. But tell me this. If you end up killing Germans, hating them, are you going to be able to love this Anna you've told me about?" "I'll never hate the German people." "I hope you're right. But you think about what I've just said. Write your letter, and I'll try to get it through. But be very careful about the promises you make." Chapter 27. Bobby hadn't gone into nursing with any enthusiasm, but as it turned out she liked it. She had always loved to learn, and she found the science, biology, anatomy, chemistry, more interesting than she had expected. But what she liked best was being in the hospital, working with people, even with the long hours and the miles she ended up walking every day. Still, Bobby missed the university and the literature that she now had no time to read. And the simple fact was, she still missed David. She missed her talks with him, the sharing, and the wonderful way he had of probing her mind and liking what he found there. She missed the beauty she felt in herself when he looked at her. She was not dating. She wanted to believe that she was out of touch being away from the university and that she wasn't meeting many boys. And yet she suspected that she was not very attractive, that Phil's devotion to her had been a sort of aberration, and David's was a meeting of minds of a kind that wasn't likely to come around again. But it wasn't in Bobby to feel sorry for herself, and she didn't do that now. She took life as it came, and she was cheerful most of the time, but when she stopped to look inside herself, she felt a relentless emptiness, and she was worried that it would never go away. Her answer for that was not to look inside very often, not to let herself dwell on her own problems. One night early in April, Bobby came home from her shift at the hospital and found her mother in the kitchen. "Oh, Mom. Hi," she said. "I thought you would be in bed." "That's where I'm going. The kids messed up some dishes after dinner and I was just washing them up." "You ought to let LaRue and Beverly do that. They're the ones who always eat after supper." "I know. I ought to do a lot of things. You sound like your dad." Bobby saw a weariness in her mother's face that was unusual. She stepped into the kitchen. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing. I'm just tired. Are you going to bed now?" "Soon. I have to study for a little while. Is there anything edible in the refrigerator?" Mom laughed. "I'll let you decide that. But if you eat something, clean up your own mess. I'll just make some toast." Bobby walked to the cabinet and opened the bread box. Mom was still standing by the door. "Bobby," she asked, "do you ever think about trying to get back with Phil?" Bobby placed the slices of bread in the toaster and then closed the little doors on both sides. She turned around. "Mom," she said, "Phil didn't want to marry me. He wanted to own me. Once he had paid off my mortgage, he would have put my title in a safe deposit box, and that would have been that." "That's how men think." "Even Dad?" Sister Thomas walked over and sat down at the table. Bobby came to the table too and sat across from her. She saw the sadness in her mother's eyes. "What's wrong tonight?" "Nothing much. Your dad and I just had a little spat." "What about?" "Money, as usual. I told him I need more for my household budget with all the prices going up, and he started in on one of his speeches about all of us being too extravagant. I thought he was doing really well in this new business. That's the mistake I made, bringing that up. He went off on a harangue about my spending money that we don't have yet. If this war ends in the spring, we could be stuck with a worthless plant and blah, blah, blah." Bobby laughed, and then so did Mom. "You better get that toast," she said. Bobby got up quickly, having forgotten all about it, but the toast still wasn't as dark as Bobby liked it. She shut it back in the toaster. "I thought you told me that you fell head over heels in love when you met Dad." Oh, Bobby, don't make so much out of this. I'm just put out with him tonight. That doesn't mean I don't love him. I know, but you just said that all men think like Phil. Didn't it bother you when you saw that in Dad? I don't know how to answer that. I met a handsome man who loved me, and I fell in love with him. I don't remember ever considering all these things you worry about. Okay, but think about it now. You said men expect to own their wives. Is that all right? Bobby opened the toaster again, and this time she pulled the toast out and set the slices on the cabinet. Bobby, try not to get toast crumbs in the butter. You know how... But she stopped. How Dad hates it, I know. Sister Thomas laughed, but then she looked at the clock. Bobby had the feeling that she was measuring the cost of staying up any later. All the same, she said, Bobby, when I was growing up, girls were taught certain attitudes that we never questioned. My parents told me what to do, and I accepted that. I stayed a little girl, really, until I got married. Then my husband began deciding everything. At first, I didn't ask myself whether that was right. It was what I was used to in my own home. That seems sad, Mom. I don't know whether it is or not, but there's a streak in me that doesn't like it. I pop off. I say things to people that I know darn well your dad wishes I wouldn't say. Sometimes I exaggerate my opinions just to show that I can think for myself. The funny thing is, Al never has tried to stop me. He likes to be in control, but there's a fairness about him, and he's not one to tromp on anyone, so he lets me get away with it. Bobby poured a glass of milk, and then she came back to the table. Mom, she said, you seem pretty strong to me. Dad always jokes about having a wife he can't buffalo. But that's just the problem, Bobby. I always feel as though I'm swimming upstream, and what I long for is a little more respect. Your dad tries to be considerate of me, but deep down he would prefer to run the whole show. Mom, that sounds awful. Sister Thomas reached across the table and tore off a corner of one slice of toast. Oh, Bobby, you're young. You idealize everything too much. She took a little bite out of Bobby's toast. I love your dad. I admire him. I trust in the guidance he gets from the Lord. He's playing the role he was taught to play, and all I do is confuse him. Are you two friends? Sister Thomas took a long time to think about that. Yes, she said eventually, but not as much as I would like. And I suppose that's the thing that is hardest for me. I became B. Thomas before I ever knew who B. Snow was. And I wish your dad had been more willing to let me become myself. David listened to me, Mom. He was interested in my ideas, got excited about them. I could have been a partner with him. So what are you saying? Are you still thinking about him? I don't know. Tell me what I should do. Mom sat for a long time, and as she thought, tears filled her eyes. Bobby, I don't want you to marry David. I want you to do life the way I've done it. That's my feeling. But at the same time, I know I've missed something. I work behind the scenes. I manipulate, I suggest, cajole, flatter, do anything I can to have a say in what happens. But if I told your dad that, he wouldn't even understand what I was saying. So I go on managing that way, and it's hard work. I wouldn't want you to go through the same thing. You're too independent. It would destroy you. Thanks, Mom. Sister Thomas got up from the table. But I already wish I hadn't said anything like that. You're too quick to jump on things and magnify them. The most important thing in this life is a temple marriage. I have all eternity to work out problems with your dad. You may not end up getting that from David, and he may not be so understanding and open once you're married. You have to consider all of that. Think about it very carefully. Mom left, and Bobby stayed up for a long time. In fact, even though she eventually went to bed, she never did go to sleep. She saw how complex her question really was, but she also felt more clearly than ever what she wanted out of her life. In the morning, she waited until she knew her dad was eating breakfast, and then she went downstairs. I need to tell you something, she told him. She was standing just inside the kitchen door in her robe. David and I have stayed in touch all year, as I'm sure you know. He still wants to marry me. This summer, I'll have some time off at the hospital, and I have some savings, so I've decided to take a trip to Chicago. I'll stay in a hotel there, and everything will be proper, but I need to go. I need to see him again and decide for sure what I want to do. President Thomas looked shocked, but he didn't say a word. I know I told you the whole thing was over, but the problem is, I can't get him out of my heart. I'm not going to Chicago to marry him. If I decide to do that, it would happen later. But I have to reach a decision for myself. One I can feel good about." President Thomas leaned his head back and shut his eyes. "Well, I won't say a word. The new rule, and I'm not sure where it came from, is that a father can't guide his children. He's some sort of dictator if he does." "Dad, don't do that to me. It's not fair. I've listened to everything you've said, and I've talked to Mom. I'll take all of that into consideration." "Thanks. That's very kind of you." Bobby had to get out before she lost her temper. Chapter 28. It was a hot day in July of 1941, and Anna was home alone. Her mother was at work. Her father and Peter had gone into the countryside to buy fresh food. When a knock came on the door, she assumed it was a neighbor, or perhaps President Mize, who sometimes stopped by. She opened the door carefully, however. She had only opened it a few inches when she saw that it was Kellerman. "Good afternoon," he said. "It's nice to see you again. May I step in for a moment?" Anna couldn't think what to do. She didn't want to let him in, and yet she feared saying no. In her confusion, she hesitated, and suddenly he pushed the door open, stepped in, and shut it behind him. "Is anyone here?" he asked. "No, but I expect my mother any minute." "But not for half an hour." "I know when she comes home." Anna could see what was coming. She began to think what she could do. He was standing between her and the door. She thought of the kitchen, the drawer where the knives were. When he took a step forward, she almost bolted, but he stopped, and she waited. "Your father has been visiting a Jew in the ghetto. I can arrest him now, and no one will be able to intercede this time." Anna's breath seemed to stop entirely. Her vision had become hazy. "However, if you are very kind to me, I would be willing to let him live." "You're a liar," she said. "You won't spare him no matter what I do." He smiled again. "Anna, I like you. I am glad we understand each other. This is not about saving your father, is it? It's about saving yourself. So let's bargain over that." "There's no bargaining with Satan." Kellerman laughed, and for a moment he glanced away. At the same instant, Anna spun and ran. She got to the cabinets and pulled at a drawer, which caught and then gave way too quickly. Several of the knives and utensils flew across the room and scattered on the floor, but Anna saw the big butcher knife she wanted. She grabbed it and spun toward Kellerman as he stepped into the kitchen. He was still smiling. "Oh, little Anna, this is much more fun than I expected. You can't imagine how much you pleased me." "Lord," she whispered, "please help me." She was crying, and Kellerman was moving slowly toward her. "We take training in dealing with circumstances of this kind. We learn to take knives from big, fierce men, and so I see no great challenge in this. Still, it excites me. I'll kill you." He stopped 3 or 4 steps away. "I'll make you a promise. I'll only injure you as much as I have to. Any time you submit your will to me, I'll stop hurting you." She didn't move. She held the knife out, waist high, pointing toward him. He took a short step forward, and she crouched a little more, ready. "Let me warn you of one thing. Never use a swinging motion when you try to stab a man. That gives him too much time to see the blow coming. You must stab quickly and straight, and it's best to catch him by surprise. Would you like to try?" Another little step forward. She straightened up, and she let her hand fall to her side. "Please don't hurt me," she pleaded. "Please don't." He laughed and took another step forward. At the same moment, she drove the knife straight at his chest, and she did catch him by surprise. His left arm came up quickly, but the knife got through, tore through his uniform, and sliced the top of his left shoulder. At the same time, his right arm crashed against the side of her head and dropped her. She hit the floor hard, but she knew he was coming after her. She rolled and slashed with the knife and felt it cut into him. But now he was on top of her, his left forearm across her throat, choking her. She twisted hard, trying to get air, and as she did, she saw a flash of red, of flowing blood. He grabbed her shoulders to keep her from twisting, but now she saw a terrible gash across his left cheek, through part of his nose and down through those fat lips. The flesh was laid open deep, and his mouth was contorted. "You whore!" he screamed at her. "I'll have you anyway." But blood was gushing down his cheek and off his chin and nose, running in a stream onto Anna's face and throat. Suddenly he released her shoulder and slammed his fist at her face. She saw the blow coming and turned, but he struck her cheek and ear, sending an explosion of pain through her head. At the same time she heard him grunt, and he pulled back, releasing his hold on her. He rolled off her and clambered to his feet. He touched his face, felt the gash, and then pressed his hand against it, but the blood oozed through his fingers. "You will die for this," he bellowed. But Anna had spotted another knife on the floor. She scrambled after it and then crouched again and waited for his next move. But Kellerman wasn't ready for that. He pulled his hand away from his face and looked at the blood. The collar of his shirt was soaked red now. "I'll have you yet, and then I'll kill you, slowly. You will suffer for this, and so will every member of your family." He looked about and saw a tablecloth on the kitchen table. He jerked at it, sending an empty fruit bowl flying, and then he forced the cloth against his face. He took a last look at Anna, who was still waiting, and then he hurried from the room. Anna dropped to her knees. For a couple of minutes she cried, letting herself vent her emotions. But she began to realize that she couldn't do this. She had to find her family. She had to warn them. She grabbed a dish towel, wet it, and wiped away the blood from her neck and face. But a big circle of blood was also on her blouse. She tore the blouse off and ran to her bedroom. She grabbed another one, put it on quickly, and flew down the stairs. Then she began to walk toward her mother's place of work, controlling her impulse to run. She had covered most of the distance to the factory when she finally did see her mother walking toward her. "Mother," she said, trying hard not to fall apart. "We're in trouble. We must find Papa and Peter." Then she explained what had happened. The two of them hurried back to their apartment. Sister Stoltz fumbled to get the key in the door, but it suddenly swung open. Anna and her mother lunged backward, but at the same time they saw Brother Stoltz, looking at them wide-eyed. "Are you all right? What happened?" Anna realized what he and Peter had seen in the kitchen. Blood on the floor, blood on the dish towel, utensils scattered about. "Kellerman was here," she blurted out. "He came after me. I cut his face. He said he would come back and kill us all." Brother Stoltz pulled them both inside, and then he thought for a few seconds. "Each of you get a change of clothes," he said. "Put everything in a laundry bag. I'll get what money we have, but we can't take anything else." Anna got her clothes, but she also grabbed a little picture of Elder Thomas and Elder Sawyer standing with her on the day she was baptized. Not 3 minutes had passed, and they were all leaving. Anna saw her mother lift a little Delft plate from a shelf and tuck it in with the clothing before she closed the door. Anna was anxious to get away quickly, but at the same time she knew the immensity of what had just happened. The family had shut its doors on everything. All their possessions, their home, their way of life. Brother Stoltz peeked out through the front doors, then looked back and whispered, "All right, we are going for a walk. Step out with me and walk normally down the street. We'll get a few streets away, and then we'll take a streetcar, get to another part of town as quickly as possible." "What then?" Mother asked. "I'm thinking that somehow we can get to Berlin. There has been more bombing there. Maybe displaced people won't seem so out of the ordinary, and we can find a way to hide." It did sound reasonable, the first idea that offered some hope, but how would they get to Berlin? "We need to pray," Sister Stoltz said. "Yes, but quickly." He bowed his head, and so did the others. "Father, we are in great trouble," he said. "We need a miracle. Please help me get my family away, and help me somehow to keep them alive." He closed the prayer. "Pray for you too," Peter said. "It's all right. Now let's step outside. Look natural." Chapter 29. Brother Stoltz stepped out of the shadows and waved for his family to come ahead. Sister Stoltz, Anna, and Peter had been waiting behind the cover of some shrubs just inside the fence of the railroad yard. Now they slipped out and hurried across 2 sets of tracks. "This train is heading north. I found a car that's marked for Berlin. Follow me. Be very quiet." The train didn't start moving until nearly 1 o'clock in the morning, and then traveled very slowly through the countryside. It was another 24 hours of midsummer heat, restless sleep, and hunger before the train neared Berlin. "I can feel the train slowing," Brother Stoltz said. "We can't be far away. We need to get off now." "While the train is moving?" "Yes, it won't be so bad. We can climb over the side, drop to the ground, and roll." "Heinrich, how can I do this? How can you?" "We must. That's all. If we stay on the train all the way into the big station in Berlin, we'll be picked up for certain. Come on now, Peter can go first, and then he can hurry and catch up with us. Anna will go second, and I will go last." "I can do it," Peter said, obviously pleased to be chosen. He got up and pulled himself over the top edge of the car and onto the ladder. "Can you see anything?" Brother Stoltz called to him. "Not too much, but it's not going fast. I can do it. Jump quickly after I do. Don't leave me here alone." "Don't worry. We must hurry after you. Go ahead." Suddenly Peter disappeared. Anna climbed up quickly after him. She jumped, feet first, and instantly she knew the train was going faster than it seemed. Her feet hit, and she was sent flying. She landed on her chest, scraping into a bed of cinders. Anna rolled over and popped up to her feet, but she felt her arms and chin burning. She spun as she heard Peter. "Anna, are you all right?" she heard him call. "Yes, are you?" "I hurt my knee," he said. "It's not too bad. Hurry." And he ran on by. Anna saw that he was limping. Anna began to run, and in the distance she caught a glimpse of a dark figure letting loose from the train, disappearing. When she got to her mother, she found her struggling to get to her feet. "I'm all right," she said, but she didn't sound all right. "Run for Heinrich. I'm scared for him." Anna did run, and ahead of her she heard her father, who was moaning with pain. "Papa, Papa," she shouted, and she dropped down next to him. "Did you land on your shoulder?" "No, I turned the other way, but I don't know. I'll be all right in a moment. How did your mother do?" "I think she's all right. Peter hurt his knee. It's you I'm worried about." Anna knew that her father's shoulder had twisted in some way. This could only make things worse. "Help me up. I can get up now." The last car of the train passed by, and suddenly the night was surprisingly quiet. Anna got behind her father and wrapped her arms around his chest, but she had the feeling that she helped very little, that he forced himself up through sheer will. "Heinrich, how are you doing?" Sister Stoltz asked, even before Anna could see her. "I'm fine," Brother Stoltz said. As it turned out, Sister Stoltz had come out better than anyone. Her elbow was sore, but Anna was scratched up worse, and Peter, besides the cut on his knee, had torn up his forearms. The cinders had apparently been more solid, hadn't given way as much where Peter and Anna had jumped. "I don't know where we are," Brother Stoltz said, "but we need to clean up so we won't draw attention to ourselves." "I want some water," Peter said. "Yes, I know, we all do. We'll find some. But it may be morning before we can get any food." They left the tracks and walked toward the buildings in the distance. They soon found a school with a little playground outside. They hid behind a pair of spruce trees and they changed their clothes. Before Peter put his fresh trousers on, his mother tore up his old shirt and tied a bandage around his knee. With fresh clothes on, they walked down the empty street until they found a park, and in the park, a fountain. Anna took a long drink, and she washed her hands and arms and her face. She couldn't get it out of her head that Kellermann's blood was still all over her. The Stoltzes tried to rest after that, lying on the grass in the park. But when the sun finally began to rise and the birds began to sing, Brother Stoltz roused everyone. He didn't want them to be spotted by police. "I wish I could promise all of you a better place to sleep tonight," he said. "I can't do that, but I do promise you that I will try to find us a place." "It's not your fault, Papa," Anna said. "It's mine." "No. Don't ever say that, Anna. You did nothing wrong. I'm just thankful he wasn't able to defile you." Anna wanted to believe that, but still, without understanding why, she felt a dreadful filthiness that she didn't know how to clean away. "I've been thinking everything over," Brother Stoltz said. "We need names we can use, and we need a story. Then we need to get into the city near a bombed-out area so we can claim to be dispossessed of our papers and our belongings." And so they became the Hofmanns, and each of them chose a first name. Then they walked until they found an outdoor market where people were doing their early morning shopping. Brother Stoltz bought bread and cheese and milk. They had not eaten since leaving Frankfurt, and the long ride on the freight train had been a difficult ordeal. Anna had never tasted anything better in her life, and she watched Peter come back to life as he got some nourishment in him. After they had eaten, Brother Stoltz told the others, "Stay here. I'm going to try to find the church, or a member." "What can church members do for us?" Sister Stoltz asked. "I don't know, but we know they're people we can trust. Maybe a member can hide us until we figure out a place to go." And so Brother Stoltz left. Anna felt stronger now that she had eaten, but her hands continued to tremble, and she constantly studied anyone who approached her. No matter what she tried to think about, the image kept coming back. The wound, the blood running off Kellermann's chin and onto her face. Brother Stoltz came back less than 2 hours later, however, and when she saw him, she knew that he had good news. He gathered the family together, and then he said, "I found the address of the church, and I went there. A caretaker was cleaning up, and he gave me the branch president's name and address. I found him home before he left for work. He lives in a house on the edge of the city. President Hoch is his name." And now tears came into Brother Stoltz's eyes. "He was careful. He was dubious about my story at first, but then he said, 'Bring your family. We have a cellar in the house. You can all stay there for now, until we think of something else.'" "It's another miracle," Sister Stoltz said. "It's what you prayed for." "Yes, exactly. We're going to live. The Lord wants us to live, or he wouldn't be opening these doors for us."
This completes the 4th CD. Please insert CD number 5 to continue with the program.
Chapter 30. Bobby's time in Chicago was dazzling. David constantly made her laugh, but he also held her hand, touched her hair, stole kisses. They spent way too much money, dinners that cost $5 or $6 for the two of them. It was almost like a honeymoon, except that each night David said goodnight at the door to Bobby's hotel room. Bobby was in love, and David adored her. She felt that in everything he did and said. As her time began to run out, she felt certain he would ask her once again to marry him. She told herself to be careful, not to answer on the basis of this golden experience, but she was certain she would never feel anything this powerful for another man. On Thursday night, when she knew she would be leaving on Saturday morning, she finally invited David into her hotel room. They talked, but then as he prepared to leave, they stood by the door and kissed. It was all very soft and sweet in the beginning, but they didn't stop after a kiss or two. They continued to hold each other, continued to kiss, and Bobby felt a hunger that she had never experienced before. She could feel his hands on her back and sides moving, caressing, felt the firmness of his body against her, and she told herself to stop, not to let him get the wrong idea. But she didn't want to stop. David suddenly grasped her tighter and whispered, "Bobby, do you want me to stay?" For a moment she couldn't think what he meant, and then she was startled at the idea, and even more startled at how much she wanted to say yes. But already she was pushing him away. "David, I love you," she whispered, "but no, we can't do that." And somehow she expected him then to propose marriage, and she expected to say yes. "It's all right, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked." He took hold of the doorknob. "I'm really sorry." She actually loved the idea that he wanted her that much, and she stepped back to kiss him one more time. "I better go," he said, and he slipped out the door. After, she took a warm bath, and as she lay in the water she was alarmed at her own vulnerability, the force of her desire. She couldn't feel this need for someone and then walk away. Everything would have to work out. The next morning, David came over a little before 10. The two of them took the elevator down to the coffee shop, and Bobby ordered an omelet with toast and milk. "I just want a cup of coffee, black," David told the waitress. It was all he ever had. He didn't like breakfast. "It's almost lunchtime," Bobby said, laughing. "You ought to be hungry. I'm famished." She flirted with her eyes. But he seemed subdued, even a little distant. The coffee shop was quiet, with only a few tables occupied. Bobby tried a couple of times to get a conversation started, and David said very little, but then, abruptly, he said, "Bobby, we need to talk. There's a lot we need to think about." She reached across the table and touched his hand. "So now you want to think. You told me not to do that." He didn't smile. In fact, he looked troubled. "Bobby, I want to marry you. You know that. But I've seen some things this week that worry me." Bobby was taken by surprise. She had felt cosmopolitan and open-minded all week. She thought she had handled things well. "I think, if we got married, I'd have to return to the University of Utah. I don't think you could be happy here." The waitress arrived with Bobby's omelet and David's coffee, and she asked absently, "Anything else?" "No," David said. Bobby was already telling David, "I don't understand." She studied his eyes, but he seemed unwilling to look her straight on. "I can't believe this is you talking, David. I thought all we had to do is love each other." "That would be enough for me. But you need your family. You don't seem yourself here." "I don't feel that at all, David." "Bobby, your church is who you are. It becomes obvious when you're out of your element." Bobby looked at her food, but she wasn't hungry now. She felt the lovely joy of the last few days slipping away. "What are you doing, David? You're the one who always said it could work." "I know. I want it to work. But I don't want to ruin you. You're a good person. That's what matters to me." Bobby saw the confusion come into David's eyes. "I don't know whether I'm good by your definition, Bobby. If I joined your church, I would stick out like a sore thumb." "David, you said you could join. Why are you doing this now? I'm finally ready to commit, and you're trying to run away and hide." "Bobby, you aren't hearing what I'm telling you. I love you. I want to marry you. I just don't want you to get into this and then find out that I'm making you miserable. Or that we're making each other miserable. That's possible too, I guess." He picked up the cup of coffee. Bobby, to most people in the world, coffee doesn't have a lot of meaning. But you know you wouldn't want me to drink it in front of our children, and frankly, that seems ludicrous to me. I would give it up, that's not the problem, but I'm not sure I wouldn't resent it. But coffee isn't good for you, David. Why can't you look at it that way and not worry about whether it's a sin or not? I guess I could, but you can't. I watched you at that jazz club. All the smoke and alcohol and loud music was part of the atmosphere for me. But you were hanging on for dear life, telling yourself you could live with it for one night. So you're giving up on me because of coffee and whatever? She slid the plate away, put her elbows on the table, and ducked her head. Bobby, I want you. But that's selfish. I'm trying to do the right thing. I'm going to see whether I can change my train tickets and leave today. Bobby, don't. I want to find a way. I just think we need to see things as they are and then work from there. I don't know whether I could get a job at the U again, but I could try. No, I won't do that to you. You love Chicago. I know, but... He dropped backward in his seat, clamped his eyes tight for a moment.